All right, are they streaming in here? I got 23 so far. Give it a minute or so.
Yep, they're coming.
Is that a Chardonnay, Matt?
IPA.
No, it's just water. It's just water. Somewhere I heard that every time you drink something out of a goblet, it's just better. And so we have goblets for our water. Yes. Lovely, lovely bottle.
I know I have a bottle of kumbaka. I'm not even sure how you say it, but it's the new healthy thing my wife's putting me on, so I'm trying to be healthy. Or at least I'm trying to do it with that. So, are you guys ready to start? CK, are we ready to kick this off?
Yeah, because you guys are live talking about kombucha, so please
That's awesome.
welcome us in.
As we're doing this, I want to welcome. My name is Robert Serchia. I'm a technical evangelist here at SUSE and part of the SUSE Rancher community. I want to welcome everyone to our first session of what we call Summer is Open. Now, I know summer is not everywhere, and I know everywhere is not really open, but we're slowly opening up and getting back to some sense of normal. This is a 7-week event, so we hope that you join us for all 7 sessions. And we'll be covering a lot of the open source projects here we have at SUSE. But this week we'll be talking about Rancher Desktop and Kim with my esteemed colleague here, Matt Farina. Matt is a software architect here at SUSE, originally from the Rancher Lab side. He sits on the board of the nonprofit Enjoy Creativity. He's a current maintainer of Helm, Artifact Hub, and an emeritus chair of Kubernetes SIG apps and architecture. So Matt, welcome.
Hello, and thanks for having me here today. This is fun, and I'm glad to help you kick off this summer's open series.
I wouldn't start this without anybody else but you. So Matt, we know you weren't in the military, but as a civilian, you had an opportunity to ride around in a giant tank, the M1 Abrams. You want to kind of elaborate, because this is not something that most people get to do in their lifetimes.
Yeah, so the M1 Abrams is a large tank. It's something like 70 tons, and it's powered by a turbine engine, the kind of thing you'd think about in an aircraft. And for a while, I worked for General Dynamics, who maintains and helps with lots of the maintenance. And I was in diagnostics engineering. And I got a story about that in a minute, but I was in diagnostics, where you figure out, how do you repair vehicles? How do you diagnose them quickly? How do you figure out what's going on? I had worked in tech support in college. Diagnostics just kind of made sense to me. How do you figure out a problem in order to repair it quickly? And I was in there, and I got to do that for a while on the M1 Abrams tank. And so as part of that, I got the rare opportunity to actually ride around in one as it goes somewhere. And quite frankly, that's not very comfortable. I'll be honest, sitting inside of a tank is, unless you're the driver's got the comfortable seat. Everybody else has a very uncomfortable seat.
So it's kind of like, Dad taking a trip to Wisconsin, Dad has to have the most comfortable seat. We don't care about anybody else, right?
Exactly. And I got to spend a fair amount of time on them that wasn't riding around in it while it was moving, because one of the things that we got to do is, anytime you figure out how to diagnose a problem with it, you actually take that to somebody in the military who's on site at our place with real tanks, and they try out what you figured out right there. And you get immediate feedback from an end user. Does this work? Would it work out in the field? Would it work in a shop somewhere? Is this a viable way to diagnose things? Does it work? And so it's almost like running your automated testing, except it's not automated, it's a person. You figure out how to diagnose a problem and then what to do about that. You hand that off to somebody. They test it and they figure it out in the shop. And so I was on there with them, talking with them about it. And one of the things it taught me was the idea of really knowing and understanding your end users, because so often that end user who I'd create a diagnostic test for and say, okay, go ahead and do this, it didn't work for them, or they knew it wouldn't work out in the field in the real world because it didn't fit. And so for me, it was this massive learning thing about learning who your target audience is and then create what they need. And so I got a lot out of doing diagnostics engineering on those tanks that I can still use today.
So do you feel that actually kind of translates to what you're doing currently here in your current role in the cloud native ecosystem, correct?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Matt, we're talking about Summer is Open here at SUSE. We have a giant campaign going on. Melissa's talked about it. Choose Open. So what does open mean for you in the open source sense of the word?
You know, I think there's a few things. One, it means open collaboration, right? One of the most frustrating things is you end up with this piece of software and you've got a problem with it, or there's a feature you'd like to have and nobody's moving fast enough on it, and you can't do anything about it, right? Or, you know, there's a
Mhm.
problem and you can't figure out the root cause to know if there's a way that you can work around it. And I think open means, in the terms of open source, it's available. I can look at it, I can understand it, I can interact with the development process because the source and way it's created is available to me no matter where it is. I think that's vital for companies these days who have software developers at them who want to engage, who are users, but they also say, aha, you know, if I tweak this thing, if I understand how this works, I can do that much more. And so I think there is that open ability to interact with the software. And I think it's really important to be able to do that because you can take it further. And so that's a big part of what open means to me, is that availability to the source and to be able to interact with it.
Okay, that's awesome. So can you give us a brief description of what Rancher Desktop's about? And while you do that, I know you have a couple slides. I'll bring them up on the screen.
Yeah, so Rancher Desktop is a desktop application for containers and Kubernetes. Rancher Desktop, they're a bit small.
Oh, it's getting there. It's getting there.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
Rancher Desktop, that's fine. So it is a software application for containers and Kubernetes. And it's entirely and completely open source, right? When you tend to think about containers and Kubernetes, a lot of times you might think, okay, I'm going to use Minikube, which is that first, or the really well-known things, or actually things that existed before Minikube for dealing with Kubernetes. But you think of Kubernetes there on your desktop, Minikube, or maybe you think of you know, there's a number of other tools that'll let you do the same thing, but most of them are command line tools, right? And lots of
Mhm.
people really ideally want a desktop application. If you're on Mac, if you're on Windows, even a number of Linux folks these days, they want desktop applications to interact with it. They don't want to dig through all the command line switches because they just want to focus on what they want to get done. And then, you know, you've also got something like Docker, and Docker includes Kubernetes in it. And but it's not open source, and you don't get to do things like choose your versions of Kubernetes. And if one of the things that I've learned is there's so many versions of Kubernetes out there. The versions of Kubernetes that are out there are almost like Android versions, right? There's so many different versions of it in the market, and different people are using them in production, that if somebody said, hey, you just get to work with, you know, Kubernetes 120 or 121, you say, but I'm still on 118. There's API differences. There's you know, there's functionality differences. There's sometimes bugs and quirk differences, and you're like, okay, I'll develop in my local environment in an entirely different way than it's going to run in production because of all those quirks. Man, I really just wish I could get my local one, which takes you away from Docker Desktop back to the command line with Minikube or something else and tying these things together. And if you want to build containers and do that, you typically just go straight to something like Docker on the desktop, or maybe Podman and a couple of other things that you might use these days to break away from that. But so Rancher Desktop is a desktop application, so GUI and all of those things, and I'll demonstrate that, that lets you build and push and pull containers and run the Kubernetes version of your choice. That's the basic functionality of it. And you can deal with things like upgrades and downgrades and all this stuff, and test things. And it's that kind of environment all wrapped up in a desktop application.
Awesome. And your target user for Rancher Desktop, in my mind, I just think developers, because I come from a developer background, but this is not necessarily just focused on developers. This is kind of everybody in that space as well, even operators maybe testing.
Well, I think there's a few different, there's obviously application developers, but I really think
Mhm.
application developers don't want to learn Kubernetes in the first place or interact with it because, you know, if you took and you printed out the Kubernetes API of just the active things, depending on the font size and things, it's 3 to 1,000 pages, depending on how you print it, right? It's this massive thing just to get the API. because there's so much to it. And that doesn't even tell you how to use it. There's a lot to know to use Kubernetes well. I think Kelsey Hightower is the one who said something like, Kubernetes is the foundation to build your app platform on, right? And so I think a lot of application developers want that, but there are a number of them who are building controllers and getting into the nitty gritty who do want it. And so there is that audience. There's application operators, and I separate that out from distributors, because I may grab, Postgres or MySQL or something like that, and I want to operate it in Kubernetes. I'm not the apps developer, but I am operating it and trying to make it run efficiently in there. And so I think there's that application operator who will use this, in addition to the application developer, and just the general workload operator, and then people who are doing some of the infrastructure, but not the cluster managers, not the people who are cluster admins trying to do that. That's not who this is for.
Okay.
This is for those people who have to deal with workloads.
Gotcha.
And
Now,
if you want to go through the slides real quick, I can walk through a little bit of the architecture. So if you go to the next slide, this shows a little bit about how Rancher Desktop works here. It's a high-level diagram. Rancher Desktop, right now, the flavors we have are for Mac and Windows. And so Rancher Desktop is an Electron app, and it wraps Kim, kubectl, and Helm. Kim is the Kubernetes image manager. It's what lets you build, push, and pull images. kubectl is the command line tool for Kubernetes to interact with Kubernetes, and Helm is the package manager for Kubernetes. On Mac, we use the hypervisor framework, and we put Containerd and K3s in a VM there that we manage. And it's using the underlying hypervisor framework that's just part of the Mac system. Right now, we're using HyperKit to manage it, which comes from Xhive and other things. We're looking at switching to QEMU as the underlying management engine in the next release, which will give us some abilities as we move forward to deal with ARM, because right now we only deal with Intel chipsets on Mac, and we're going to start building out ARM capability here in the future because of the Apple Silicon. And so that'll give us some more flexibility there. And then on the Windows side, we manage it entirely differently. We use the Windows subsystem for Linux v2, and in there we bring up a distro that's really lightweight. You don't ever need to interact with it, with Containerd and K3s in it, and manage it on that size. And the reason we don't do it in a native VM on Windows and control our own VM is because you need Windows Pro and higher in order to do that. So Windows home users could never use it then, but by using Windows subsystem for Linux, it's available to everybody on every flavor of Windows, except I think Windows S, which is what they use on like tablets and mobile devices.
Gotcha.
So,
would you like me to go to the next slide?
Sure.
Awesome. You mentioned
so
this before.
Slide. Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wanted to touch on Kim for a minute. Kim is a separate project out of Rancher from Rancher Desktop. You can actually use it with K3s separate from Rancher Desktop. We bundle it because it lets you push, pull, and do those things. And that's, we think, is really needed functionality. If you go to the next slide, this is just the project page to show you it's a different page. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit about how it works. So Kim has a command line you run on Mac or Windows, and I'll demo this in a minute. But inside of Kubernetes or K3s, you have a daemon set with an agent and build kit in it, and build kit does the work. And what's really neat about this is if you go to the next slide, if you build something with Kim, and I'll totally demonstrate this, it's going to go ahead and take that built image, put it into Containerd, and without pushing and pulling that image and version is now available to K3s running in Rancher Desktop. So I could build an image, run it inside of Kubernetes in a pod or something without ever having to push or pull it from a registry and having to deal with that round trip. It can speed up certain development cycles because you don't have that external source in the picture. And that's one of the neat things about Kim because of the way it works with Containerd.
Awesome.
And so that's what I really wanted to show about the architecture if we wanted to talk about other things.
Yeah, we have a couple other questions. This is this is full of awesome features. Which some of your favorite features of the Rancher Desktop?
So I think my favorite feature has to do with your version selection of Kubernetes. Okay. because it's like Android versions. And I know there are people using versions as old as like Kubernetes 1.13, which makes me cringe a little because it's so far out of support. Uh, but it lets you tie that environment to it. But we also let you do things like upgrades. So let's say I'm running Kubernetes 1.17, 10, and I want to come up to 1.19.11. Let's see what that upgrade looks like, or to 1.18. I say, I'm running my workloads. I'm going to upgrade the environment my workload's running in, and I want to see what my application looks like coming out the other side in dev or test. I can test that locally, and I can just go into the Rancher desktop settings, select my newer version of Kubernetes, and it'll prompt me saying, hey, we're going to upgrade. You choose OK, and it'll turn down Kubernetes, bring it back up in the new version of Kubernetes with your workloads there. So not only do you get to have your version of Kubernetes, but you can actually test that Kubernetes upgrade path underneath your workloads. And I think that's a really useful and underappreciated thing, because I've had that situation burn me before when I just blindly trusted.
Sure. Now, you can go up in versions, but you can also go down, but that comes with a caveat when you try to downgrade your version within Rancher Desktop. Do you want to explain what happens when someone attempts to downgrade for any particular reason?
Yeah, if you ever go back down, unfortunately, your workloads are not preserved anymore. And the reason the workloads aren't preserved is because a newer version of the Kubernetes API has new resources and new capabilities on those resources in it. And when it can accept, when you go down, those are gone. And the older version doesn't know how to handle this well. So downgrading in Kubernetes is just a problem. If you went to Minikube or the other tools, you'll actually find those same issues there with downgrading. You have to wipe it away. And it has to do with Kubernetes just doesn't downgrade well because of the way resources change over time.
I think one of my favorite features is the reset feature, where you just resets everything, and I back to square one, like it's a fresh install, and I love that because I keep going back and going reset, and I know like where it's a perfect baseline, and I'm not guessing where I'm at. I'm not having to go to the command line. It's just one click, easy. I know where I'm at with this cluster.
Yeah, that's another feature I could show. It when you click the reset button, we realize that you're screwing around with a local environment and you just want to like get rid of it, have everything come back quickly. That's what the reset button's for. It's for, let's just start from scratch, get it back really pretty as quick as we can, so that way you can start from scratch. Because especially if you're trying things out and you screw up and you just want it reset. That's a nice thing to have. I've tried to do that with VMs over time with snapshots and stuff, and it's never as quick. Our goal is to try to be fast at that.
Yeah, and it's really fast. If for anyone who's used it already, that reset button is probably 30 seconds at most on an average machine. So now Rancher Desktop, we have this giant CNCF landscape right here. Where does this project sit in? Is this standalone? Is this something that ties into anything else, or is this one of those where it's just truly for developer, operator, those type of users that we've mentioned before?
Yeah, it's really for the person to have a desktop environment to come together and use things. And so our goal is actually to take existing projects like K3S, Containerd, Kim. We've got some others we'll probably integrate and make easier to use over time, and bring them together so that in the context of being on your local system, you have what you need and it works well together in order to get things done. Our goal is how does somebody in their local computer do that? Now, if you're in production, you're going to have a different set of tools to make your production environment come together well, right? You don't need the exact same tools because the way things are spun up, you're not developing there, you're operating there. And so our goal is really to be kind of aggregating some of those the tools to make that desktop environment work well. And so it's not something that's going to integrate with a bunch of other things where it plugs in that way. It's more going to be the integrator by bringing in things.
Awesome. So obviously it sounds more like it's a standalone application. Why not just tie this into like a VS Code extension or something like that? Because the developer and me go, hey, make it, add more stuff to that VS Code sidebar for me.
Well, VS Code's popular, but a lot of people use other tools as well. They might use, there's a bunch of Go IDEs out there, and they might be using one of those. There's Vim and Emacs users, right? There's a lot of other folks out there who use different tools, and we didn't want to just have it be a VS Code thing. We'd rather have it be something that could work for anyone. And at the same time, because we're running these things in different environments, right? Mac and Windows, under the hood, we have quite a bit of different business logic in order to make those environments work. And if we are going to end up adding Linux at some point, then that would be different again, because your interaction with the underlying operating system is different. And so the exact same code doesn't work in each place. So it's not as easy to do as a VS Code extension. That is something we could have done, but we really wanted to make it accessible beyond people who are VS Code users.
Sure. So it was released back in May of 2020, if I remember correctly. Do we have any idea of like, what you do is from a weekly download perspective?
No.
No?
No,
Okay.
at this point we don't. We are working on ways to layer in some metrics. Unfortunately, I don't have download numbers at this time, but that is one of the things. So the way we built this was, let's just get something out there as quick as we can so we can get feedback and we can learn through the process of both building it and using it, right? And so we race to get it out more quickly than we race to have business metrics behind it to show, hey, look how great this is. And so now it's one of those things we're backfilling, because I think getting into the market was more important to us. So unfortunately, I don't, but in a number of weeks, I hope to have some kind of environment where I can get that.
Awesome. And you have a staff contributors, there's yourself, maybe a handful of other individuals as well?
Yeah, there's myself plus 3 other people who are absolutely wonderful to work with. They have been doing most of the coding lately as I've been pulled off onto other things. I started doing the work, but they've been working in different areas, and they do an absolutely wonderful job. They've kind of divvied up different parts, whether it's back end or front end. And right now there's about 3 people who regularly and actively daily contribute to it as we work through all the different features and changes and lessons learned in building something like this.
So we talked about those contributors. Do you have any community contributors to this open source project yet?
We've had people who've brought issues and questions in and had feature requests, but we haven't had anybody jump in and really start coding from the outside in order to add functionality or fix bugs or that kind of thing yet. We're very much open to it, but we haven't had much about that.
Awesome. And what's some of the better things an individual can do when they find an issue? Is it, is there a process that you guys are following that kind of, gets back, regardless of, people finding they're going to find something, but what's the best way for them to, engage and when they do find an issue?
I think the best way is to come over to GitHub. We're up on GitHub, just like any project, github.com/rancher-sandbox /rancher desktop, or you can go to just rancherdesktop.io and get to the link off of there. But if you just go to GitHub, and we're just like so many other projects up on GitHub, you can file an issue. If you want to try to fix it, you can create a pull request. If you do want to chat directly with the developers, we do have Slack. It's in the Rancher user Slack. And if you start up Rancher, and I'll show this off in the demo, there's actually a place where you can get a link directly to Slack from there, so you can come find us. But there's a room where you can come into for Rancher Desktop and Slack, and you can get a hold of us and talk with us about it. But otherwise, it's just like so many other projects. It's entirely open source, and it's up on GitHub where anybody can come find it.
Awesome. Are you ready to demo this awesome application?
Sure, I guess.
Hey,
right.
hey, Robert
Yeah.
and Matt, do you guys want to take
Yes.
a couple questions before the demo? Would you like
sure.
a little question break? Oh,
Sure.
This is CK, everybody. I am lurking, answering your questions. So we've got quite a few questions, mostly from Ricardo Gutierrez. I hope I said that right. Who wants to know, will Rancher Desktop replace Rancher D, Rancher Web UI? And Rancher D is, talk to us about Rancher D, Matt. I mean, that's kind of not a super well-known thing anyway, is it?
No, no. So maybe the easiest way to put it is Rancher Desktop is not Rancher itself. So when you think of Rancher, the multi-cluster manager, and anything that has to do with multi-cluster management, that's the Rancher project or Rancher product. Rancher Desktop is entirely separate. We don't include Rancher itself in there. If you want to install that yourself, you can. At some point in the future, we'll probably make an easy button or an easy toggle switch that lets you do it, but we haven't done that yet. It's targeted at a different target audience, so it's not somebody who wants to manage clusters. So when you think of Rancher D or the Rancher dashboard or Rancher GUI or any of those things, where it's all about multi-cluster management and knowing what you've got running where, that's a different use case than Rancher Desktop, because we want to make that developer and application operator their lives easier by giving them a great local development environment. And so you won't see it being a replacement for anything else because we're branching off into a new area for us.
Cool. Okay. Also had some questions about Kim. First of all, what is it again? And then can you cache images with Kim?
So Kim is it's a Kubernetes image manager. I'll show it off here in a minute with a couple of cases, but you can push images, you can pull images, just like when you run Docker pull or Docker push or Docker build, you can do those same kinds of things with Kim. And so because when I run Rancher Desktop, I actually don't have Docker or Docker Desktop or any of that installed on my system. I just have Rancher Desktop installed. And so I need to have all of those other features available, and Kim provides that image building and image management capability, and it's a pass-through to Containerd, which runs under Kubernetes. So any of the images I build or I pull with it are available in Containerd for Kubernetes to interact with and use without it having to pull again, because they're already cached by Containerd.
Cool. All right. You guys want to hit the demo and then I'll save. There's more questions on Kim and Kim being able to log into a registry, but maybe you'll show us that in the demo, Matt, and we'll come back to my questions a bit.
Yes, and I'll say right now, Kim logging into a registry does not work right now. It's actually expecting Docker credentials. It is one of the issues in the backlog. So Kim is an open source project that is in its infancy. It's 6 months old. It just was started this year. And so as we encounter things, as we build out features, not everything's there yet. And the ability to log in and log out is one of the now highest priority features for Kim at the top of the backlog. And so I expect that to come here in the near future. Maybe for the next Rancher Desktop release, we'll have it bundled. If not, we expect it in the one after that. So no, unfortunately, I can't say that one, but it's coming, that capability. All right. Now,
Thanks.
Now, oh, Robert, can you give me the ability to share again? There we go. All right, can you all see my desktop?
Yes, we can.
All right. So one of the first things that'll show, we've got a terminal window up, and I'll show off Kim here for a minute. All right, because we were just asking about Kim. And so here I've picked out Kuborden, and Kuborden is another one of the projects that's probably going to be covered this summer. And this is something that we've been developing out of SUSE. And there's a Kuborden controller. It's a Go application, and the Go application has a Docker file, okay? And because it has a Docker file, we can build it. So I can do Kim build, and in this case, I'll do -t. I'll just give it a name, foo. You don't actually have to give it a tag or a name or anything. And then I'll tell it the current directory. Now, what it's going to go do is it's going to build the image here. And this should look a lot like what you would get if you use something like Docker or another tool. And the reason for that is underneath all of it, you actually have BuildKit doing the work. And BuildKit's what everybody else or most others are actually using under the hood. It's an open source library and it's pulled into other things. It was originally out of Docker. And here you can see it's doing certain things. For example, it pulled down the Go 115 image and it pulled down some other images, and then it starts building on top of it, and it's working through each of the layers. And so right now it's doing go mod download running inside the container, which is one of the builder steps. There's 10 steps here. And so it's going ahead and building that image. And you can see it's doing now onto the last step where it's actually building this application. And it's the same thing you'd get if you had Docker build or something like that. And it should be almost done. And so this is how you would use Kim normally. And I'll give a more in-depth example, but I wanted to show here that it works right off the bat with existing code bases. And this is useful for local development, things like that. Now, in this case, what I did was I chose a non-trivial thing. And that's why it's taking a moment to do everything, because this isn't something that's just simple and easy to do. Now, the actual building is happening inside the container, inside of Kubernetes, in that builder image that I was showing earlier in the architecture. And so it is actually happening inside there, and then it'll be available inside of Containerd when it's done building. Let's see. This was a non-trivial example, and I should have done that. And you'll see I have no warm cache. If I were to run this again, it would go pretty quick with a warm cache. In fact, I need to look at why is it running slow on my system. All right, so now it's exporting it to make it available, and it's done. And if I run Kim images, which should be familiar as somebody who did Docker images, you can actually see here's some of the things available in my system. This is an app we'll talk about in a minute. Oh, it's not showing me. So there is a small bug in Kim where it doesn't necessarily show all of the images. So I created one called foo, and there is a bug in Kim. It has been filed. This is what we get when we're all alpha software, where it's not showing the image right now. But these are the other images that are here, and I'll show some of it. Now you might wonder, why is Kim available just at my command line? And so one of the things about Docker Desktop is there's a little icon in the menu bar. If you're on Windows, it's in the top right. Or I'm sorry, it's in the bottom right in the taskbar where all your other icons are. If you're on Mac, it's in the top right, but it's that icon. And if you come here, you're gonna see a few things. You'll see the state Kubernetes is in. Is it running? Is it not? Is it starting? That kind of thing. You'll see preferences and kube contexts. So you can switch between your kube contexts easily here. If we go into preferences, this is where we get to see a whole bunch of neat things. And right now you'll see my desktop is in dark mode, which is why everything looks dark. Sometimes I switch it to light mode before I present, but I forgot today. But it does respect your dark mode, regular mode preferences. And in this case, the front page, we tell you some things about it, right? The status of the project of the version you're using, we're alpha, right? If you want to get in discussions, we tell you how to come to discussions, and we give you links to the homepage and to issues, because we know if you want to come find the homepage, issues, pull requests, connect with us, we want to make that easy, especially since this is new software as we're developing it. And we'll tell you the version here as well. Now, if we get into the Kubernetes settings, this is where things get interesting. So I'm running Kubernetes 1.19.11 here, and I tend to, in a lot of my demos, run the oldest supported version of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes will support the last 3 minor versions. So with 1.21 out, it supports 1.21, 1.20, 1.19. And the major public clouds, the latest version they all support is that oldest supported version of Kubernetes until just before there's a new one. So like the few weeks before, Kubernetes 1.22 comes out, they'll start supporting 1.20. They tail end of the Kubernetes supported. And so I like to run with the public clouds or what people tend to be running in their environments here, because those changes make a difference. And so here it is, and you can click on the drop down and see all these other patch versions that you can switch to. And then you can choose how much memory you've got in the VM and CPUs. You'll see this on Mac. You won't see it on Windows because WSL controls that. This is that reset Kubernetes button we talked about. And then down here, and you'll see this on Mac, you can choose which of the commands you want to link in, kube control, helm, and Kim. Do you want to link in, and it'll link it into user local bin, which ones you want to make available. And if you already have a version available because you've installed it with something else, then you can't check the box here because we're not going to overwrite something else you've got there. And so we want to make these available if you don't already have them. Most people don't tend to have Kim, but they might have one of the other two. So we make that easy to get those here. and they'll automatically be added by default unless there's a reason. And so on Windows, we're actually able to shadow those in the path in a way we can't do on Mac. And so you don't get this because they're there unless you've installed your own, and then that's used instead. But these are the basic settings and why Kim is available just for me to use. We have some other things such as images. This is just like that image list. It has the same flaws and bugs. I'm not sure why it didn't show the new one that I built, but it has the same things. You can also pull images and build images here based on information you put in here, and just like show all images, you can see all the images, including the ones that Rancher itself is using. And then we do have a troubleshooting section, which lets you have a factory reset. This blows away all of the data and everything that has to do with Rancher Desktop, the caching, the VM, everything is blown away. This is different from resetting Kubernetes because lots of those cache files and things we keep around for performance. When you do this, it has to re-download things, because when you switch Kubernetes versions, we don't have every version of Kubernetes installed, because that would just be a whole lot on your system. We pull it down as needed. And so this will blow it away and you'll have to re-download those things again. All right, so I'll come out of here and let's go towards something here. So I've got this Anvil app running. It has an image, and this is just a simple dev example. The app doesn't exist anywhere, and you can see it's a web app. I'm port forwarding through, and you can see this is actually Darren, architect, the guy who did Rancher itself. He did a talk, Darren Shepard, on K3S internals, and this was a detailed talk. And I've got a little app that runs it, but I want to alter that app, right? And I want to see what it'll look like. So here I've got the app, and let's see. I am going to alter part of the app. So I'm going to go in and alter my code, and I'm going to change out the URL here. So I got a new URL, I've modified the application. Now I've got to go build it. And since it's going to run in Linux, even though I'm on a Mac, your container's still running in Linux. So I'm going to go ahead and rebuild it. And so I'll rebuild it here locally. I'll do Kim, build. And this time, because it was tagged at 01 before, I'll tag it 02. And we're going to do that current directory. Now this is going to build quick because all it did was based on the scratch image, and it's got to create the new one and make that available. Now, if I come over here, where I had it going here, what I have is a Helm chart here, right? And if we look at the Helm chart, it was using the 0.1.0 version of this. We'll test the 0.2.0 version. So we'll do Helm, upgrade Anvil, and I can set the image tag, right? Image tag to the new version. And so we're going to go upgrade this, and we'll let Helm go through its upgrade. And all of this, Helm and everything, was bundled in the path. And if we do we'll go look at the pod to see the pod come up. We'll actually see that my Anvil pod came up really fast in that default namespace. And the reason the pod came up so quick is it didn't have to download the image, it just had to start it. And as a Go app inside of there, it starts really quickly. There was no need to pull it because it was just already in containerd. In fact, I've done this before I'm happy with it in order to want to go push it. So we can go ahead and just take this, which will give us our port forward again. And then we'll refresh, and we should see, oh, and it looks like I screwed up somewhere. I probably went ahead and no. Well, you see, oh, there was an error, I see. I missed it down here at the bottom. We had an error, image pull error. That's probably why the images did not show up. Something's going wrong here. We've got a little bug. This is what happens in these live things, right? So what I'm going to go do here.
Demo gods are not on our side.
The demo gods are not on our side. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to go do a reset. Now the reset is going to go ahead, stop Kubernetes. It's blowing away my environment. In this case right now, it deletes the VM as well and creates a new VM. One of the things we're actually going to do is break apart that deleting and destroying the VM. And we're going to go ahead and stop that. So you've got reset Kubernetes and its containerd and its underlying environment. that will be coming up, not in the next release, but probably the one after. And so Kubernetes is starting. This is how long it takes to refresh it. Live demos are fun, right?
Matt, you want some questions while we're waiting?
Sure.
Okay. Alok wants to know, can I run Rancher Desktop on SUSE Linux?
No. It's only
Windows
running
and
on,
Mac, right?
it runs on Windows and Mac right now. One of the things we're doing, and by the way, it's done resetting, but one of the things we're looking for information on is, do people want this on Linux? And Windows is the primary. If you look at the Stack Overflow developer survey they do every year, the last one they released, Windows was about 44-45% of people's primary operating system, right, for their development. Next came Mac with like 26-27%, and then about 1% behind that was Linux on the desktop, which is more than it's ever been. Both Mac and Linux are growing, Windows is decreasing, even though Windows has that big lead. And so we went Windows and Mac first, but we see this Linux contingent, and we're wondering, because Linux folks tend to like to spend a lot of time in terminals and things like this, and they're not as into desktop applications. And so we're testing the market right now and asking the question, would people want to run this on Linux desktop? And we're also curious of how much of that is like GNU Linux, like OpenSUSE or SLE or Ubuntu or Red Hat or something like that, and how much of that Linux is somebody running Chrome OS on a Chromebook, because that's Linux on the desktop, and there are a number of developers who use that. So we're trying to assess that market share now to see if Linux on the desktop is a direction we should go. If people are interested in that, please let us know, because the more people who speak up, the more likely we're to go there.
Malcolm votes for it, and I think, did we already do a poll on this on the community, or do we? I think if we didn't, I feel like we did a poll on this, but I might have.
We have a poll. I don't know if it's closed yet, and I definitely don't know what the results are. It was going to be one of my upcoming questions when I chat with y'all, but I know that we did do a poll, and I don't know the results yet to know how much there is there.
I think so too.
So
right,
if
cool.
I come back here, because for a little while the reset's been done. We'll take more questions in a minute. If I come, you'll see we're back at the beginning here with none of the other stuff. So we need to rebuild this, because one of the things it did was, until we get reset Kubernetes, resets everything. So we'll just rebuild this real quick. And the image is there. And so now, instead of doing a upgrade, I do have to do an install, because it's not running. Okay, and now and we'll see, it's still coming up here, but it says it's running, and it's running. So my issue before was somehow there was a disconnect between Kim building and Containerd and on all of that working, which is probably my own fault, because well, I don't see much in my general usage in this. I switch between development versions of this a lot, and I just switched back to a production version before this. So this is probably my own fault in switching between versions. And so now we'll do the port forwarding. And oh no, the video is not available. Oh no, they always change my things. Yeah, because here's the video I had picked.
Oh, you Rick fooled us.
Yeah. It normally works, but every so often they change the URL structure and some of the other things in caching. But it did upgrade to the new version in the container there. That's what I was trying to get at. Unfortunately, I probably bugged my own environment running a development version. Now, if we go back to preferences here, one of the things we can do here is we can actually go ahead and test an upgrade. So let's say I want to go from 119 to, and you'll see a new version came out. The reason I'm running 119.11 was that was the default one for 0.3, because that was the latest 119 when we released it. And 119.12 came out after we released it. But let's say I want to go up to 120.8, and I go choose this. It's not going to prompt me that I'm going to go upgrade Kubernetes. Do I want to proceed? I'll go ahead and I click OK. And you'll see I don't have this installed. And I don't have the Kubernetes bits. And so it has to download it. If it already has it there, it'll switch really quickly. But if it doesn't have it there, it actually needs to download it. And it looks like I haven't actually done this across any of the versions I've worked on of it. And so right now it's downloading the Kubernetes bits, the K3s specific bits that it needs to start up Kubernetes. And the progress bar, we want folks to know what's going on in case for some reason it gets caught up or it can't, and you're trying to figure out how long it's going to take. We figured a progress bar would be nice to have here. And so it's downloading it, almost done. And then it'll go ahead and just start it up. Now it was able to keep that database going. You'll see in the background, it kept running until it went to go start it. Now my port forwarding was stopped because it's actually took down Kubernetes and started it back up. And you'll see my bar at the top here, it went gray on me. Now these icons are probably going to change in an upcoming version because the colors aren't specific for the Mac standard, and we're working on that. But you saw how quickly it came up. While I was talking, it came up and the status disappeared because it's up. And if I go, or if I just go get PO, you'll see it's come back up. And if we bring the port forward up again, what you'll see is even though it doesn't show, the app came back up. And so you can actually see, here's what's happening. We just upgraded Kubernetes and saw the workloads come up underneath it. Now at the same time, if we wanted to downgrade again, we'll say we'll go back to 119.11, and it says, right, it'll reset Kubernetes. And what that means is it's just going to wipe everything out. And so as it goes to wipe everything out, that's just, it's just warning you, right? It's going to reset it. It's going to wipe your Kubernetes stuff away. So I'll say, okay, and you'll see things disappear. And you'll see it didn't have to download Kubernetes this time because that was the previous one I had. It already had that download and cached. And so now it's just starting it. And let's see. And it was less than 15 seconds on the system. It came back up. But what you'll see here is it's a fresh system. It's a fresh Kubernetes. Nothing's there. Yep. So that's what we have. So that's really my basics of my quick demo to walk you through the basics of it. You might say there's some features I want here, you know, logging in around pushing and pulling. If you have Docker installed and you do Docker login, Kim will automatically pick up those things because it can read the Docker credentials. And the ability for Kim to log in and log out will be coming in a future version. That is one of the things in the backlog that we've been talking about. And that's a Rancher project, so we know it's coming because we're developing that along with Rancher Desktop.
Awesome.
So that's me here. Let me find, and I can stop my screen share.
Awesome. So I have a couple questions on our side. Is what are some of the features you guys are currently working on for Rancher Desktop? So can you say, can you give us a little teaser of that?
Sure. So I guess it's feature-wise. One of the things that's we have that port forwarding feature, that tab that I didn't show off, and that's because it has had trouble working. It's not totally stable, and so we're working to improve on that. And one of the ways is on Mac, we're going to swap out HyperKit. In fact, the work is the pull request is open right now to switch to QEMU based on a project called Lima. Lima is just like Windows subsystem for Linux. V2 is a VM and all that on Windows. Lima is trying to do that same thing for Linux, but on Mac, right? And it's an open source project. It's a great open source project, and we're rebasing our Mac support on top of that, and then we're going to introduce QEMU things and hopefully be able to do some stuff like cross architecture stuff in the future. So you know, you could one of our long-term goals here, or midterm goals, is to be able to build on AMD 64 or ARM, both architectures. So you can push different architectures and build them in an environment, run different architectures. This gets really important when you deal with Apple Silicon, because right now we don't support Apple Silicon, and I want to be able to support Apple Silicon in the near future.
Okay, I guess I can roll into, the next question we have is, what are some of the, one or two, three features that you'd like to see but you don't have contributors currently to get there to go to market with? I think you've already mentioned the ARM support.
Well, I think the hard part with the ARM support is actually having people with the ARM chips and to test. And so we just got in our systems with the ARM chips because that was our blocker, is we had to go get hardware that had, the Apple M1 on it in order to start doing that. And we didn't want to do that until we were sure Rancher Desktop was going to be successful. People wanted to use it, something we're seeing now. So we got the hardware, we're starting work there. So that's an area I think we're okay on. Unless people do have that and do want to test it out and help us with that, we would be delighted at that. Some of the areas is part of a good developer experience is those external tools that interact with it, VS Code extensions, things like that, where we branch
Mhm.
off of the core project. And I think that's an area where we need to improve on. And it would be great to have more people helping us make those external integrations work better.
Awesome. Awesome. I guess we can turn it over to CK. Is there any more questions from the community?
I have a lot more questions, and I know we only have about 9 minutes, so I just wanted to use this opportunity to invite all of you guys back on Thursday. We have Matt joining us again, twice in 1 week. We're so lucky and thankful to Matt. We have office hours Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time, and you can find all the info on community. And I will get to a couple more questions, but I know some of y'all probably need to drop. Also tomorrow we're having a special happy hour edition. Robert, you want to talk about what's going on in that, and then I'll throw you guys a couple questions.
Sure. So tomorrow's happy hour is we're testing out a new webinar platform, and we want to make sure that it meets our needs as a community, and we can support larger workloads of individuals coming on to the webinar platform. So we want to introduce our newest member to the community team, Luke Mwila. He's not here right now, unfortunately, but it'll be a kind of a meet and greet to meet some of our new members of the SUSE Rancher community.
Yeah, and people can find those details again on community.suse.com. Okay, and real quick before my final question, well, Robert, I'll ask a couple questions and then you'll tell us what's happening next week before we wrap. So gosh, some of these are loaded questions. Which one do I want to throw at you, Matt? Okay. Someone said, who said, okay, the question is from Motion. Sorry, I probably pronounced that wrong. So is Rancher Desktop the same as Docker Desktop, but more agile?
It's similar. The big differences are one, we're completely open source. Docker Desktop isn't open source. We're trying to do a completely open source environment, which is one of those things you'll get out of SUSE. We tend to do everything in the open. The other thing is we're putting Kubernetes first. That's one of the things. It's kind of the inverse of Docker in that way. You have Docker first and containers first, and then Kubernetes second. And we realize that there's this market of Kubernetes people who have slightly different needs, which is why they're dropping into all these other tools. So we've kind of inversed that and said, okay, we're going to put Kubernetes first, but also have those container management capabilities. And so in that way, it's different, but our target market is similar. We're just trying to meet that some of those unmet needs of the Kubernetes application operator and application developer market through Rancher Desktop.
Cool. Another question about K3D, which we've talked about here on the community quite a bit. So any relationship between Rancher Desktop and K3D? How are they different, Matt?
Well, there isn't a relationship from them. So K3D lets you run K3S inside of Docker and create different K3S instances inside of Docker. It's designed solely around Docker. And a Rancher Desktop runs K3S, but there's no Docker required. In fact, on the system that I'm demoing on, since this OS has been installed, it's actually never had Docker installed on this system. And so with Rancher Desktop, you don't need Docker. With K3D, it's tied to Docker and using that Docker environment. Where they relate is they both deal with K3S under the hood. And K3S, for you don't know, is a distro, for anybody who doesn't know, is a distro of Kubernetes designed for lightweight environments. Instead of running things like etcd, it runs SQLite, and it's designed for, those smaller environments with a smaller footprint, which is perfect for that desktop environment because your Kubernetes API is still the same, your ability to do things is still the same, but it's shrunk down. It's one of those things that's nice with Edge and stuff like that, and we really wanted to give you the most we could out of your desktop environment for you and not suck it up with the app.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, Matt, because so K3S is the default Kubernetes version with Rancher Desktop, but you can choose a different one. Can you? That's just me asking a dumb question. Okay.
Oh yeah, so there's different distros, right? So there's K3s is a distro of Kubernetes,
Yeah.
and it's K3s only. You can't switch to a different form of Kubernetes, but you can switch to different versions of it, different versions, and it's going to be the same. Just like with every distro, you're going to get the same API version. That's Kubernetes everywhere. In
Yeah.
fact, for
Okay.
conformance, with conformance testing in Kubernetes, they look at your API version, and they'll do things like test the API to make sure the API responds the way it's supposed to, and Kubernetes works the way it's supposed to. So with the distribution, you can actually change out some of the things in the back end, but as long as that API and that experience is conformant, you still have conformant Kubernetes, because what people put in is what they're going to get out, and they'll expect it. And so you can optimize and change certain things.
Sounds good. Well, Robert, I think there are more questions, but I think I'll throw it back to you to talk about where to find more info to you and Matt.
Sure.
Someone's asking, is it available on Git? And also just what else they can be doing, challenges and stuff like that.
Awesome. You guys should be seeing my screen right here. But for us, we want to thank everybody for coming. But this is your opportunity to get involved. You can, first of all, download, install, use Rancher Desktop. Give us feedback on what you like, what you don't like. If you find a bug, find an issue, report it. Give us a star on GitHub. This is kind of like currency in the open source world, is what I'm told. You can try to, attempt to, contribute to the open source, log issues, and you can also join us at community.suse.com or our Slack channel. These links will be made available here this afternoon as soon as I get them posted. If you want to follow Matt on Twitter, it's at Matt Farina. You can follow me on Twitter, but obviously we need you to, follow Rancher Labs on Twitter and come join us on community as well. Next week, we'll be talking about Opni and what that is and where it fits in our ecosystem. But I want to thank everybody for showing here. It means a lot to all of us here at the SUSE Rancher community. We hope to see you next week. Matt, thank you very much for coming. We know you're a very busy person, but on behalf of the SUSE Rancher community, Matt, thank you. And we'll see you guys, hopefully see you guys on Thursday for our office hour. So thank you, everybody.
I was on mute. I said, and tomorrow for the happy hour. Happy hour, it's an early happy hour, so maybe it's coffee hour, but
it's happy hour in somewhere around the world, right?
It's happy hour somewhere, exactly. Yeah, and we'll for those questions that didn't get answered, come back on Thursday. We can talk through some of those. I know, Ricardo, you had a lot of questions. He is the question asker winner today, followed by Rohington, I think, had a lot. Oh yeah, and Robert, it didn't look like you had the Git address up there, but maybe I'm just missing it. Was that on your, or was
if you go to rancherdesktop.io, there's a link in the top right corner to get right to it. That's probably the easier way to get to it, rather than me putting the whole path in. But that's what we tell people to do.
Great. Thank you. I like to ask stupid questions so other people don't have to. All right. Thanks, Robert and Matt, and thanks everyone for joining us. And we will see you very soon.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, y'all.
Bye.
I have to figure out how to stop this now.
I haven't figured it out yet. Here it is.